Well, hello, welcome. I'm glad you found me. Today, yours truly, Tristan McGough, is going to be dealing with another session in intermediate selfology. And today we're going to deal with the 7 classes of connotative meaning. We're going to be, in a word, poetically, noting the net of meaning. We'll be looking at the various classes of what we were talking about last time in terms of connotation. So there are various kinds of meanings in the notational set. We talked about, just to recapitulate quickly, we talked about your personal meanings that are occurring as you're thinking in any given moment. That's your renotation of any notations that are coming your way. That's all based on your idionotation, that is your inner set of notions that form the system for your interpretation. And you have a preferred meaning, that is, you have prenotations, things that charge certain words in certain ways that may not be exactly what the connotation is in any given case. And there are the denotations, whereas, of course, what are you referring to when you are using that particular word? Are you referring to the particular object or just to the abstract idea itself? So today, what we're going to look at is actually those 7 classes, and if we were to break them down very simply for the introduction here, we'd be looking at let's just take any given term. We take a term, and the term that, of course, is most favored in this course on selfology is self, because self, as we've spoke of, is multifaceted in terms of its meanings. It is any of the 7 pristine cognitions that we've spoke of, all the way from the all to the one, to the conscious being, to the whole being, to the real self as well as the expanding self, and what is really only the true self, and that is the accomplished self. So when we're talking about that, we're saying something such as the self is X. The self is the 7 pristine cognitions of self. That would be literally what I might be saying. I could also speak in a figurative way. I could say these are the 7 gemstones in the crown of consciousness. Or I could speak of it in terms of moral or an anagogical way. A moral way is where now figurative, I'd be saying X is like P, right? I'd be saying like these pristine ideas, they're like the gems, the gemstones in the diadem. However, when we're talking about moral, we're talking about X being P edifies us. It gives us a moral lesson, and it helps to structure our character. It gives us greater meaning. In other words, it helps integrate us as a part within the whole. We find out where we fit. And so that's part of the moral meaning. Where do we fit as responsible conscious beings within the universal pattern? And then there's the anagogical, which is looking at the spiritual or mystical dimensions of anything that might be said. So if I were speaking about the self and the 7 pristine ideas from a moral perspective, I would be indicating that in order to fully build your being as a human being, you have to expand beyond merely considering yourself as a finite personality composed of a finite body with finite emotions, with finite thoughts. You must see yourself as well as a transfinite self-conscious being who at any given moment has an entire sea of inner ideas to which though they're not being attended, form the very basis of you being a psychical being. And, morally speaking, unless that's all grounded in the understanding that there's a spiritual whole that interconnects, that the interdimensional aspects of yourself as a psychical being, as a part within the whole, unless you understand the grounding, that fundamental, essential ground upon which everything is established, you cannot possibly experience the full measure of what it is to be self-identical, to have an identity as consciousness. Well, that's a moral imperative. That's something to which everyone would seek in order to achieve fuller cognostic freedom. Instead of limiting yourself as a human being to just a person, you see yourself as a person, as a psyche, and as a spirit that is a consciousness that is part of the universal consciousness. So that would be an anagogic, or a moral perspective, that idea of character building you as an individual human being. However, in terms of saying the 7 pristine cognitions of self are something that occurs only within a human being, on an anagogical level, as a mystic, I would say every single conscious being has these ideas that are implicit, that are implicit within the framework, that foundational framework, which is their essential being as conscious being. A epoptic meaning, connotative meaning, is a transfigurational meaning. It's an initiatic meaning. It's something that's introduced to you and has a stunning effect that transforms the way that you think. And this can be either by way of an introduction of a concept in meditation, or through a book, or through discussion, or through any kind of interaction where notions are pinging the notions of you as a conscious being. And then there's, of course, the holistic, where you take all 6 of these together. And X means all these things, all these P's together, all these meanings together, such that, and then the such that is the big picture. That's the worldview that each of us are in process of refining and honing and adding to and deconstructing certain parts, and other parts of it we're converting or sublating into other higher functions. So in the 7 classes of connotative meaning, we're actually dealing with the interpretant. In other words, each of us, right now, right here, you yourself and I myself, are going through a process of thinking about what is being spoken of. And there are the various meanings that are all involved. However, when we drill down just into the connotative meaning, we find that that has these various, from the holistic right down to the pragmatic, which is a pragmatic meaning for anything is if it works. X does such and such, right? What's the meaning of a wheel? And then you roll it. Oh, I see what you mean. You know, what's the meaning of rain? And then the cloud bursts forth and the rain comes down on someone who lived in their entire life in the desert and never experienced rain. Ah, now I know what I mean. That's the pragmatic. And then I would say after that, literally, remember when you had such and such an experience in the rain. So those are the various classes that we're talking about. So the literal can be actually historical, physical, episodic, mathematical, statistical, programs such as in a computer. All these things are literative. They're indicative, they're declarative, quantitative, they're descriptions right? Or formulations of things. These are the literal meanings, the literal definitions that we take when we're speaking of things. The pragmatic we referred to, they're the practical, the useful, the utilitarian, operational definitions. Figurative are, of course, the analogical, the similar, the things that are comparative and evaluative. And these are basically depictions or comparisons, whereas there are descriptions, usually, or formulations in terms of literal language, even if it's abstract, such as mathematics or other things. The fusion of those is, of course, in something like topography and geography, where you're using mixed kinds of symbols. And, of course, moral is your normative, evaluative. And these are prescriptive, or they can even be proscriptive, thou shalt not. You shouldn't do this kind of thing unless you want to end up, the boy who cried wolf. Unless you want this to happen to you, nobody ever believe you, keep crying wolf when there is none. Okay, and then, so these are moral precepts or stories. And now the anagogical, these are the spiritual, the religious, the mystical, the mysterious, the symbolical, the hagiographic, like with saints, the mythological accounts and legends and tales. So those four are basically the way that we navigate meaning, which are, as we said, one of the essential components of any idea is, what does that idea mean? And so the notions that we form in our own minds, these are reflections through association with the terms and the notations that we utilize. Now, I want to call attention to the transformational aspect of the apoptic, because that's the initiatory and empowering aspect. This is extremely important in terms of the experiential aspect to anything that's occurring within the higher philosophical dimensions, the higher dimensions of your own cognostic being. That is why meditation, as well as impartation from those along a lineage, are very effective in transforming you from the apexal level of this octahedron of consciousness. What is all of this in terms of the connotative meaning? The various meanings we spoke of had to do, of course, with unraveling the mystery of existence, the mastery of Maya, that is, as parousia, as conscious being that is actualizing its being, its potential being, into actual being. You are recovering or cultivating the archetypal message. Now, what's that message? We spoke of it several times before. Today, in terms of a nutshell, what we were considering is the meaning aspect of the seer. That is, of the one who utilizes the mind in order to see reality as it is. In the same way that there is meaning, there is the model. That is, we find exemplified in certain individuals and in certain constructs and in certain buildings and in certain movies, we find models which exemplify the precise harmonious arrangements of the essences or of the qualities of any given thing in order to make it beautiful. And in the same way, there's a means to accomplishing anything that occurs. There's meaning, there's a model, there's a means, and there's a method that's being utilized by the will in order to accomplish the various things. So, in terms of selfology, What we are looking at this very moment are the various meanings that the self can be unfolded. The various meanings of that selfology has been focused on for these last 20-some episodes in terms of intermediate selfology, and before that, in terms of Selfology 101, and even before that, in the Self-Transformation series, the Seminar on Self. All of these are dealing with unpacking the full self, which is those 7 pristine, intuitive ideas that all conscious beings have. So until next time, my friends, remember, behave. When you must, be good whenever you can, but above all else, be yourself.